Today, we're excited to be talking with Kristin Hansen. Kristin is the executive director of the Civic Health Project. She's the director at AllSides Connect, and she's involved with the Listen First Project, Weaving Community Coalition. This is a space that is responsible for bridging the divide, for bringing people together, how to connect with people across party labels and across the toxic partisanship that we find ourselves in. So really similar to a lot of the work we're doing here. So I'm excited to be talking with her today, and I hope you enjoy this interview. I've been excited for this conversation for a long time because obviously you know what we do as CommonAlly, reaching across party lines and just trying to unify people around issues that matter to them. And I know that you are a juggernaut in this space as far as like really understanding the psychology behind that, the mechanisms that are important for actually activating people in that way. So I'm excited for this conversation. I just want people to kind of learn a little bit about you and your backstory and how you came to this point, if you don't mind just introducing yourself.
Not at all. That's great. Thanks for having me, Aaron. I appreciate the introduction, and I had to chuckle a little bit when you used the word juggernaut. If I have come to arrive at any insights at all in this space, it's because I came into it so certain that I knew absolutely nothing and needed to compensate for that somehow. I've lived mostly in the United States, and aside from the fact that I majored in political science, I really have treated my understanding of our country and our politics as more of a hobby. Whereas my full-time day job has been primarily in the tech sector. I've worked in high tech, in different marketing and communication roles for most of my career in big companies and small. And that was true right up until good old 2016, when something happened that kind of jolted me out of out of a sense that I didn't need to focus on politics.
Yeah. Well, I love that you put it in that perspective. And I kind of find myself in a similar position where I've always been interested in politics since a little kid,
Mm-hmm.
and have followed it forever. And I've been as active as I possibly could, but I'm not a poli-sci major. I didn't have a former career in politics. My former career is a content producer. So I understood the relationship of media and people, and I'm a people person, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like you said, politics affects us personally on different levels. And I think that's what has drawn people in to this sector since 2016, and obviously before that as well, but it's just been heightened since then.
Sure.
So I think sometimes that leads to greater success because you are able to be more vulnerable than people who are experts, coming in.
Yeah, maybe. But at the same time, I want to give a big shout out to the people who were actively thinking and working in this space for so much
Say
longer
hello.
than I
And then
have
next
been.
time.
Hi, it's so nice to see you.
She said
Aren't
it's so
these
nice to see
visits great?
you. Yeah.
Seeing your little visitor, it reminds me of one of the many silver linings of the pandemic is just that proximity to our kids and those delightful little visits throughout our workday.
I know.
They're
And they're
great.
excused, like your heart doesn't drop anymore. It's more like, oh, this is what we all know where we are. So
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'll pick up sort of where I left off.
please.
So I appreciate what you're saying, and at the same time, I want to give a shout out to all those people who were, I don't know, woke, whatever the word is, but thinking and working actively on political reform issues, including cross-partisan reform, for much longer than I have been, and they have been the beacons on the path and the people that I've been learning from
Yeah.
since entering this space myself. And not even in 2016, even after the presidential election, I continued working in tech in the private sector for another year and a half before I was able to commit myself full time to political reform work. And, a simple way of describing my journey from the presidential election in 2016 was it started with this kind of emotional, oh my gosh, how did this happen? To a more intellectual curiosity phase of, how did this happen?
Yeah.
To reaching a point where I felt like maybe I knew just enough to be dangerous and that I could start to put some kind of an action path together around what I was learning. But I got to say that journey was so steep, and it was marked by just a lot of humility and almost embarrassment that I really realized I knew so little about my own country.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we work with young people a lot. I know you do as well, and I was shocked of just the level or lack thereof of civics education, and that, there if you're not taught how your government works, it's hard for people with busy lives to go out and actively find that information. I think they just go about their lives and figure politics is a separate thing from them. And I think we all fall into that trap. So I don't think you're on an island there by any
Mm.
means.
Yeah, and fast forwarding to today, because of course, nearly 4 years have gone by, that is for me still one of the struggles in my day-to-day work is connecting, finding ways to connect with people who don't obsess about politics and political reform the way I do, making it meaningful, relevant, and something they feel inspired to be more involved and engaged with. It doesn't have to be to the level that I am. I mean, not everyone's going to quit their day job and devote themselves full time to cross-partisan political reform, nor should they. We still need people to do lots of other things, but just to ratchet up the level of awareness and engagement to the level that I think will serve our country and our communities well.
Yeah, and I think I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but how are you doing that? Like, what are some of the ways you do that?
Initially, as I said, it was just to do individual learning, research, uh, landscape analysis, I guess, trying to understand the political reform space so that I could see where it would make sense to plug in. I found my way somewhat unexpectedly to cross-partisan work because I thought I was going to be coming at this from a very partisan frame, and I've probably already exposed the fact that I come from a more progressive frame. But I found myself peeling back layers of an onion, and as I went deeper and deeper, I thought, I think most of the answers to what we're dealing with as a country are not partisan answers, they are cross-partisan. And so I'm going to dedicate myself in that direction, and that's taken a couple of different forms. One is that, along with my co-founder, Rob Romero, I lead an organization called Civic Health Project, and we are a nonprofit grant-making organization that supports both research and what we could call interventions or activities in the cross-partisan reform space. And we're especially interested in research and activities that are designed to drive down the levels of partisan animosity,
Right.
negative partisanship
Yeah.
in our country. That's the wonky term for that is affective polarization, but
Hmm.
whatever you call it, it's that tendency we have to go tribal
Yeah.
in our political beliefs and to let all our other identities to be subsumed underneath one political super identity. And that's unfortunately the trend that's increasingly happening in our country, is that all our other potentially cross-cutting identities are getting sorted and subsumed, and increasingly we're the red shirts and the blue shirts, and that becomes defining and ultimately divisive.
Yeah, where it's such an important intersection, and that so the term cross-partisan, political work, is it the same as saying nonpartisan? Is it,
Mhm.
I know there's obviously like nuance between bipartisan, nonpartisan,
Right.
but what's the true definition of cross-partisan?
Yeah, nonpartisan, bipartisan, cross-partisan, and transpartisan are terms used somewhat interchangeably in the work. And I think they're all intended to mean roughly the same thing, which is not
Hmm.
coming from a single strictly partisan frame,
Yeah.
as in not strictly Democrat or not strictly Republican. I tend to prefer terms like cross-partisan or transpartisan because they feel more broadly inclusive of the fact that there are a range of political identities out there. There's a whole range from extreme red to extreme blue, and there are people who don't identify as either,
Yeah.
who strongly identify as independent, who identify as libertarian, who um, identify as something else. And so cross or trans are the terms that seem to best capture the notion that it is about all of these different political identities, including agnostics, being able to come and work together on problems.
Hmm. Great. And do you see an upswell in people who do identify as independent more so than before?
It isn't so much about what I see. There are important, research firms that are looking at this, like Public Agenda and More in Common, who identify a broad middle of people that might be defined as the exhausted majority, for example, or that's like
I
one
love
of the more
that.
popular terms, the exhausted majority that doesn't want to be painted as extremely left or extremely right. And then you can just look at the voter rolls, and people do either register as being affiliated with a party or not registered with a specific party, and non-affiliated or independent is increasing over time. There's also a lag factor because people don't always change their registration preference, even if in their mind they are now somewhere different.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've heard, especially with young people, I think the numbers were going up when you look at the data as far as like people identifying as independents, but they still vote in
Mhm.
line, in party lines that they did before as well. So I think what they think is one thing and how they vote is another, which is
Yeah,
always
and
interesting.
you can have the flip side of that too, where someone long ago registered as a Republican or a Democrat, and while they may not feel comfortable in that skin anymore, it's still what the registration rolls say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those parties too now, I mean, the two-party system just feels so factioned and it doesn't feel as identifiable as it used to be. So I think people feel politically homeless in a way. And I think
Hmm.
that it's trying to get that to have some understanding around it, and then do a lot of the work that you've already done, and bringing those sides together. Um,
And may I add, factions are forming and strengthening within the parties as well. Certainly
yeah, that's what
among
I mean. Yeah.
yeah, within the parties. Among the
Mhm.
more interesting dynamics over the past few years would be the schism in the Republican Party between the Trump supporters and the never Trumpers. And in the Democratic Party, we saw it play out in the primaries,
Yeah.
the Sanders and Biden camps. So that is a dynamic that, from our perspective at Civic Health Project, we're frankly just as interested in as what's happening between Democrats and Republicans. We think these schisms matter and are important to understand and stay close to as well.
Yeah, I agree. Your work with AllSides Connect, can you talk about what that is and what you're doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our grantees within Civic Health Project is an organization called AllSides for Schools. It's a subsidiary of AllSides. And within that, we've built a platform called AllSides Connect. So these are all interrelated, obviously. AllSides is a media and technology platform dedicated to sharing news and information from across the media bias spectrum. The premise is all news is biased. So it's important to consume a balanced diet so that you're not always getting your news from one biased angle, but from multiple biased angles. That's the basic idea. But we're now taking this concept from information to conversation through the development of the AllSides Connect platform. This is the technology side of the ledger, and what we've built and launched is a real-time video platform that's purpose-built for civil discourse. It enables individuals or small groups to come together in face-to-face conversation, just like you and I are doing right now over Zoom,
Mhm.
to engage in deep, rich conversation on topics that may be controversial, that people may have different perspectives about, but the platform is designed to take folks through these conversations in a guided, facilitated, and safe way so that all sides feel that they are being listened to and can contribute in ways that will be well received.
That's all right. So that's really interesting. I mean, that's obviously, what we're trying to do at Common Ally, being, finding common allies by finding the kernel that you agree on, and then starting from there, and starting with dialogue and communication. So big advocate of that. What I'm interested in some of the ways that takes place. Like, what does
Mhm.
that guidance look like? What's the, like, can you walk me through that just so I can further understand, like, what if I was to get on there, like, what would I be looking at?
Sure. Well, the first important thing to understand is AllSides Connect is fundamentally a platform. And so you could theoretically have any kind of conversation within the platform. So for that, we look to our partners, our program partners, organizations like Close Up Foundation, which serves middle and high school classrooms across the US. So classrooms are one constituency we serve with this technology. Another partner is Living Room Conversations, which
Hmm.
fosters dialogue and connection for adults. And so whether you want to engage in conversation as a a teacher of a classroom looking to get students connected with students in other parts of the country, or you're an adult and looking to engage in and practice respectful civil dialogue. This platform enables that, and the conversation you have within it is provided by a program partner like Living Room Conversations or Close-Up Foundation. And when we say it's guided, although there are many different conversation groups out there doing this kind of work, they tend to follow a fairly similar format or methodology in terms of taking conversation groups through structured rounds. So it's a step-by-step process. And that process involves establishing norms or agreements up front, then moving to rapport building so that people start to feel comfortable with each other and build trust in that environment.
Mm.
Then moving to the topic at hand, which could be whatever it is, could be health, immigration, could be the pandemic, it could be economics, whatever the topic is. There's a strong emphasis on listening, and the premise is you're not debating a topic, you're sharing your perspectives and other people are listening to you. And then you move to a reflection round toward the end, which is an opportunity for people to share what they got out of the experience. And it's a chance to show appreciation for one another. That's another element of the rapport building that is going on through this process. The intent most of the time is not to try to change anyone's mind, but rather to create an atmosphere for listening, understanding, tolerance, and the real goal, empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy for other perspectives.
Yeah, which there's been a shortage of lately, so that's really good to hear. Um, the that sounds like you need buy-in on both sides, right? And this is one of the things that I see just in my everyday life is when you get to that impasse where you feel strongly about this in one way and someone feels differently. It's hard to get both people to say, "Okay, I care enough that I want to sit here and get through this and figure it out because I respect you enough where I want to get past this," right?
Yeah.
Is this a tool for people that are at that point? Or can this also apply where people aren't as welcoming to that concept?
Well, at the end of the day, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So
Yeah,
I think it comes down to successful marketing, figuring out how to make this experience, for starters, not scary.
yeah,
Not scary and not like taking medicine that you're not going to like, and make it enticing for people of different uh, natures or tendencies.
yeah,
So, how can you frame a conversation, whether it's in person or it's over a platform like this, to be inviting and not intimidating? I think it really comes down to how you describe and offer the opportunity up to people, and including young and old.
yeah,
Um, Beyond that, I want to say that my sense from working in this space and working on this platform for a long time is that the appetite is out there. The challenge is it's more around the logistics.
yeah,
And that's the problem we're really trying to solve with the technology. When I say it's purpose built, I don't just mean for a real-time conversation. I mean all the hard work of finding people to put into conversations in a way that's balanced, right? So if you
hmm,
want to have red-blue conversations, you got to find people who are red and people who are blue.
yep,
If you want to have rural-urban conversations, same thing.
yep.
You've got a sign-up challenge, and then you've got a matching challenge. And then, frankly, the hardest part is the scheduling challenge. So this is where I think technology is required to make this whole thing scale, because you can have a lot of people all over the country who have an appetite, even if it's just a limited appetite, to speak to their political other or their religious other or their geographic other. But if they can't find each other, if they can't get matched, or as we say, mismatched, then the conversation can't happen. So we are trying to facilitate the ease and the scalability of making those connections and conversations happen. That's really what it's all about.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's really important. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's nothing easy about this, and I'm also not grilling you on like, come on, what are the answers and solve world problems
Not
here.
taking
So
it as a
don't
grilling.
don't get me wrong there. I'm really fascinated and super passionate about the work you do, and when I say juggernaut, I really mean it in the sense that I really think you're leading the charge, and you are part of many. Right? This is not a singular action, and I think that you've built coalitions that are doing the hard work that get us to a positive long-term goal. And that's the other thing I'd love to hear a little bit about is, we live in a society that is about immediacy. It's about
Hmm.
instant gratification, dopamine, and now. And I think that's hurt us as a nation and kind of just as a species. I think we need to breathe a little bit. We need to listen more, to your point, and we need to look at legacy in our children and our grandchildren and what we're leaving for them.
Hmm.
And it sounds like you're doing a lot of that work up front. Can you talk about just, and I know that's kind of a loaded question, but long-term, short-term
Hmm.
goals, and do you see that in a similar way?
Well, first of all, again, I want to give a shout out to the people who have been working in this space for years, building the kinds of coalitions that you're talking about. In terms of cross-partisan political reform, though this framing oversimplifies it a bit, I look out across the landscape of the United States and I see both an army of structural reformers who are working on the institutional and
Hmm.
structural issues that hamper the effective governance, self-governance of the country. And then I see an army of social reformers who are operating more at the level of the individual rather than the institution, and helping equip and empower individual Americans to participate in healthier ways and more engaged ways in our democracy. So an example of a structural reform would be, working on gerrymandering, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas on the social reform side, it's looking at issues like making sure civics education is a part of what everyone grows up getting, and making sure that civil discourse is a skill set that we impart to young people as they enter adulthood. So that's the distinction between the structural and the
Sure.
social. And there are really important coalitions and coalition builders on both sides of that ledger, whether it's, on the structural reform side, some of the work going on around Unite America and Represent Us, or on the social reform side, the Bridge Alliance, the Listen First Coalition, the Weaving Community campaign that's just recently kicked off as a
Yeah, which I
response to
definitely want to get into
coronavirus.
that
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
And I'm galvanized and encouraged by the fact that not only are all these coalitions building critical mass, but they're becoming more mutually aware. And this is where the armies all join into a battalion, and makes me feel that we've got a fighting chance in America of driving meaningful structural and social reform. And furthermore, I think that the structural and social reformers see their work as symbiotic, as
Yeah.
mutually reinforcing, and watching that play out is really exciting too. So I don't necessarily label myself a coalition builder so much as someone who appreciates the coalition builders and wants to put wind in their sails.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, well, great. I'm glad you articulated that, and that's what we're here for. You are here to clean up the mess that I say. So perfect. um, and in that building, and in that, with those two forces on those sides of the ledger, what does the opposition look like? Like, are we swimming upstream?
Mm.
What are the forces like that are not looking through the same lens?
Wow, that's a fun question to think about and try to answer as best I can. Maybe my answer will be a little unexpected, but I kind of think that the two main forces operating against these reforms are apathy and extremism. So it's almost like extremism and its opposite are the two biggest challenges we face in enacting meaningful structural and social reform
Mm-hmm.
in American democracy. And maybe they're self-evident, but just to try to explain them, I think that the extremism, the forces of extreme partisanship, and the uh, win-loss mentality that drives our politics today makes it not just difficult, but anathema to think that people of different political teams, tribes, or stripes could ever come together to solve problems. Uh, Theoretically, that principle of coming together and solving problems, collaborating, compromising was enshrined in our democracy, but in practice, that's not what we're seeing
Yeah.
these days. So that extremism is one of the forces against reform, and then apathy is the other. If too many people see the functioning of government at a countrywide level, at a national level, as being irrelevant, or having been um, discredited,
Yeah.
then not enough people will get involved, not enough people will vote, not enough people will support reform to ensure that reform happens. So that's why I would say that both apathy and extremism are the challenges we face. And I don't ascribe either of those attributes to one side of the political divide or the other.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
see people who are both extreme and apathetic among more progressive liberal Americans, and then we see the extremists and the apathetics among more conservative Americans as well.
Yeah, I think it's been more evident now that that is a two-sided thing. I think before it was a bit harder to see, but since 2016, I think that is totally heightened. It's in your face every day, and now with the
Yeah.
pandemic and everything like kind of being wrapped around COVID too, and seeing some of those divisions, it is more evident that this is certainly on both sides. You had mentioned the weaving community. This is something we are a part of. Very proud to be a
Yeah.
part of this. Can you talk about that and share the initiative there?
I'd love to. And this is another program that we've granted to from Civic Health Project. So I guess fair to say that's sort of the connective tissue through this conversation, is that both the work on the AllSides Connect platform as well as the Weaving Community campaign are aligned to our mission at Civic Health Project of ratcheting down that partisan animosity, that affective polarization across America. The Weaving Community campaign, I'm also really proud to be a part of. It is a partnership at a broad level between an initiative that was inspired by David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times and is a commentator on NPR, and he launched something called Weave, the Social Fabric Project, which is about restoring the health and strong functioning of local communities. And strengthening local communities has many obvious benefits.
Hmm.
A primary thrust of the Weave initiative is to address the endemic issues of loneliness, isolation, deaths of despair that have come to plague and define a lot of local communities across the United States. But another byproduct of building healthier communities is you are doing the work of helping people to identify with something other than that national, partisan, tribal identity. So
Yeah.
in that sense, Weave is very connected to what we do at Civic Health Project. If you can help people feel connected, engaged at a local community level, they take on more and more healthy identities. I'm a neighbor, I am a volunteer, I am a local citizen, I'm a member of the city council, or I go to city council meetings. These are all ways we can put on really healthy identities that aren't strictly red or blue.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really important byproduct of the work that Weave does. Now, the other part of the partnership on this campaign is the Listen First Project and the coalition of 300 plus nonprofits within that coalition, all of whom are looking at different dimensions of bridging, cross-partisan bridging, bridging across other types of divides and rifts in our country. A heavy emphasis, again, on listening and dialogue and understanding and empathy, but sometimes more of an action-oriented dimension to that as well. How do we bring people together to solve problems, define a policy, complete a project? But it is all kind of premised on the idea that we need to bring people together across divides to make good things happen. So out of this partnership came the Weaving Community in Crisis campaign, both as a response to the immediate challenges we face around coronavirus, and just as importantly, addressing the long-term downstream consequences of the pandemic, which will be hitting us at all levels: physical health,
Yeah.
mental health, economics, social and emotional well-being, all of it. We're going to go through multiple waves of what this pandemic means for our country, and this campaign is there to create and offer positive opportunities for individuals and organizations to connect, to care for one another, and to create a different future based on what we've learned out of this pandemic.
Love it. It's really honorable, amazing work you're doing, and that everybody's doing in the community and the coalition. So thank you for shedding light on that. I think it's important everyone sees what's going on there. Um, so a couple things there. I know we're getting close to time here, but um, to the point about local involvement, I think the cliche of all politics are local.
Mhm.
I fully believe that. I think that you see the things that are in your backyard before you see things on a global level. And I think if you can act locally, you make a better chance at making global impact. Um, so, what are some of the ways? And I know you've kind of answered this already, but I'm really interested on maybe some tips on how do people do that? How do people get involved? And I think it's also, there's a bit of a disjointed effort when it comes to, the general campaigns, right, in politics. Like, you hear about
Yeah.
things on a national level. One of my last questions, I have a million more, but local politics, they're not as well funded, they're not as well known. The communication, the media, all the things around it, it's just not there. So what are some of the ways that people can get, active in their own community?
Hmm. Yeah, good point, Aaron. A lot of those assets aren't necessarily there at the local level, but one thing that is there is a much more significant degree of trust. This is the thing that local, regional, and even state
Yes.
governments can have in their favor that the national government does not have going for it right now. Across the board, um, some things are very dynamic right now based on people's perceptions of how either the administration or Congress is handling the pandemic. But by and large, what we see is that trust levels in federal government are quite low, but trust levels in state, regional, and local government can be quite
Yeah.
higher. That's a huge asset and an invitation to individual citizens to get involved. So, the next step from just having positive feelings or feeling a sense of trust in your local government is to get out there and support initiatives. They don't have to be led or driven by your local government either. They can be led or driven out of other centers of gravity, other centers of momentum in your local community. That could be a community center, it could be a faith community, it could be a school district. Look around you and see where good work is being done and attach yourself to it.
Yeah.
Attach yourself to it. You know,
Love that.
a big need in communities right now is just around the very, very basic issue of food security. That is the simplest way imaginable to involve yourself in what communities need right now at this moment.
Great. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. That's great. Thanks for having me, Aaron.